Hello and welcome. I'm Paul Kilmer, Director of Public Programs at the National Building Museum. The National Building Museum is the country's foremost institution dedicated to telling the stories about and inspiring curiosity in our built world, the places where we play, work, and live. For over 4 decades, we've presented celebrated exhibitions and programs that have touched on everything from design and construction to advances in sustainability and resilience to social justice and equity issues. This program is no exception, advancing the museum's role as a thought leader by addressing important and timely topics. This program is presented as a part of the museum's Equity in the Built Environment, a series of conversations that focus on how buildings, landscapes, interiors, and streets can be the cause of, and more important, offer solutions for social and racial disparities. I want to thank Studios Architecture and Arup for their generous support of the Equity in the Built Environment series, making it free for all attendees. If you enjoy what you see in this program, please let us know and consider joining our membership program. You'll receive early access and discounts to other museum programs and events. If you're already a member, thank you for your support. It directly impacts our ability to create world-class programs and exhibitions. Visit our website, mbm.org, for more details. Now it is my pleasure to welcome our facilitator for the program, Maisie Hughes. Maisie Hughes is co-founder of the Urban Studio, a nonprofit dedicated to equitable and sustainable urbanism with design immersion projects in DC, Los Angeles, and Baltimore. The Urban Studio is comprised of designers of color working in communities of color to green cities for all people. Maisie also oversees the planning, strategizing, and implementation of American Forest's urban initiatives, which focus on urban forestry and social equity. Maisie holds an executive certificate in nonprofit management from Georgetown University, as well as a master's in landscape architecture from Morgan State University and bachelor's in Afro-American studies from Howard University. Please join me in welcoming Maisie Hughes.
Thank you so much, Paul. It's great to be here. I grew up hearing stories from my mom about her cousins who somehow lost the land that my family used to own in Southern Maryland. I was raised in the suburbs of DC, so I had no memory of and no connection to this land. But I knew my mom did, and I knew this because she seemed so hurt by these events. And my mom was from a generation where they rarely talked about the past, and they certainly didn't talk about it in detail. So when my mom passed away, the history of our lost land was buried with her. I never really understood the significance of this lost land until I went to college for Afro-American studies. In my studies, I learned that Black people and our relationship to land is one of the most defining characteristics of the Black experience in America. It was then in college, forever ago, that I began to understand what most people in America still do not know. And that is one of the most insidious and often hidden legacies of racism in America is how race is used as a tool to limit access to wealth and opportunity in this country. And land is often an important building block to creating wealth. So tonight, I'm super excited that we're going to meet the people leading a movement to reclaim stolen Black land, and as a result, to restore wealth to Black families. It is my absolute pleasure to facilitate this discussion around land reclamation with these two dynamic ladies. Kavon Ward is the CEO and founder of Where Is My Land? Kavon led the successful return of land stolen from Willa and Charles Bruce. This taking occurred way back in 1924. But as of 2021, this land is being returned to the descendants of the Bruces. Kavon is the founder of Justice for Bruce's Beach and started her advocacy around Bruce's Beach on Juneteenth, 2020. Kavon is a highly sought after educator and reparative justice consultant. She is the former Congressional Black Caucus Fellow and policy lobbyist. She holds a bachelor's degree in communications and a master's degree in public administration. Kamala Miller Lester is the research lead for Where Is My Land. Prior to joining Where Is My Land, she worked as an attorney for a major firm in Washington, D.C., an adoption counselor for Tennessee Children's Services, and an associate at a law firm in the U.S. Virgin Islands. Kamala holds a bachelor's degree in government from Smith College, a master's degree in public administration from the University of Memphis, and a JD from the George Washington University. Kamala is fluent in Spanish, Portuguese, and proficient in American Sign Language. I am delighted to talk with them both here tonight and bring this Black girl magic to the virtual stage of the National Building Museum. So let's get started.
Thank you, Maisie.
You're welcome. Welcome.
Thank you for that beautiful introduction.
Awesome. Thank you so much for your amazing work and for joining us here tonight. I want to dive right into it. My first question for you, Kavan, is to tell us about Bruce's Beach and what happened in 1912.
Absolutely. So Charles and Willa Bruce, they were Black entrepreneurs and arguably co-founders of Manhattan Beach. They purchased 2 plots of land on the Strand in Manhattan Beach and created a beach resort for Black people to enjoy leisure and to be in community with one another, because as most of you will know, they were not allowed access to beaches up and down the coast of California, perhaps maybe in Santa Monica, the Inkwell, but that was about all. And so they purchased these 2 plots of land, built this beach resort. And I just want to add that they paid more money for their plots of land than their white counterparts. And so when more and more Black people started visiting the resort, white Manhattan Beach residents did not like seeing that. And so with the collaboration of the Manhattan Beach City Council at the time, the KKK, and the Manhattan Beach Police at the time, they were threatened, they were harassed, and this was in hopes to get them to leave their property and their land. But when 10-minute parking meters didn't work, roped off access to the water didn't work, phone campaigns to threaten and harass the Bruces didn't work, and the KKK burning mattresses and tires on their property didn't scare them away, eminent domain was used to force them off of their land. And despite the Bruces asking the courts to award them over $100,000 to leave, they only received a little over $14,000 and were forced out of Manhattan Beach. They ultimately moved to East LA and were relegated to being cooks in someone else's kitchen. And so the city condemned the property and said they wanted to use the land to build a park, right? But the park wasn't built until 30 years later, and the park was not built on the land that the Bruces earned. It was built behind them. The land that the Bruces owned is now the lifeguard training facility owned by LA County. And so in 2020, I started my advocacy for the Bruce family, and it ultimately led to the county agreeing to give the land back. And then the California state legislature creating and passing legislation that would make the transfer possible. And then, of course, as you know, Governor Newsom signed the bill last year. And so the land will be transferred any day now.
Wow, that is compelling. I mean, I think it brings up questions about eminent domain, about how it's used as a tool. And I don't know if Kamala or Kavan, you want to sort of talk a little bit about what that means.
I'll let Kamala answer that.
I can talk about that. Eminent domain actually is one of the main mechanisms that is used for taking land, and one of the main reasons that a lot of our claimants are coming to us because of eminent domain exercised. And we've seen it disproportionately affect Black people. There's one town that I read about where Black people comprised 13% of the population. But when eminent domain was exercised, they were 67% of individuals affected. It's used to, I guess, to force people to leave. All of a sudden, the city needs a park. All of a sudden, they need a new government building. And we have cases where the only Black family in the town is the land that they happen to take. And another thing is under the guise of urban renewal in the 1950s, where a town or a county could declare a neighborhood a blight or a slum. People were displaced because of reasoning that a developer could make better use of the land and they could eradicate the slum. And though eminent domain and the eminent domain clause of the Constitution says that the person whose land is taken has to be paid just compensation, when you're taking what they call a slum house, of course, they award them slum prices. So what happens is that they have to relocate to another area that they can afford, because what is built in its place is usually middle income housing or high income housing or resorts, casinos, and they can no longer afford to live there.
Thanks for that explanation. I think that that is really interesting, especially in the context of Black people and lands, but it being a legal tool that governments can use and something that we see disproportionately impacting Black families. I do want to remind the audience before we get to our next question that, of course, you guys have an opportunity to propose your own questions in our Q&A function in your chat. So make sure you take advantage of that. And then I'm going to jump to the next one. Kamala, can you tell us a little bit about why helping Black people discover, search for, identify, and reclaim taken land is important?
It is important because one, no one is doing it on the scale at which it needs to be done. It's just now being brought to the attention of legislators, and California is the only state that is really close to looking at this situation and taking it really seriously right now. And it should be in every state, because we have clients coming to us from pretty much every area of the country and almost every state in this country. I think it's important because a lot of these families have been fighting for the return of their land for years, and they have lost hope. They feel dismissed, they feel unheard, and they're given a message that they should just get over it and move on. And lack of state action, they've been outmaneuvered in courts by savvy corporations and other individuals that have better access to legal representation, and that takes a toll on your emotions and on your psyche. And you may ask, can restitution and restorative justice raise the morale of the Black community in general? And I think it can. I think that seeing this taken seriously will, in general, raise the morale of the Black community. However, this always seems to be balanced against how those acts are going to be perceived by the most radical members of the white community. And in order to keep poorer whites from being angered, justice is sacrificed when it comes to Black people. And that's no matter how egregious the wrong committed, and no matter how much evidence there is of that wrong, even when the wrong has been admitted by the government. But it's like, aside from that, it is just the right thing to do. Other groups of people who have suffered from state-sanctioned injustices in this country have been compensated for it, and fairly compensated. And interestingly enough, the only group of people that received reparations for slavery was slave owners, compensated for the loss of their slaves. But I don't think that returning land to people is necessarily reparations, it's restitution. And I think restitution for something that's stolen is simply asking to be compensated for the theft.
Oh, pull that apart a little bit more. Pull apart the distinction between reparations and restitution.
Reparations is a wrong done to an ancestor, wrong done to someone in general, that has affected the community as a whole. Slavery is a situation that deserves reparations, and it's a little grayer, and it's a little more difficult to define what is owed for that, because it's in the trillions of dollars at this point. But restitution is, say for example, somebody steals something from you, and then subsequently you get it back. That is restitution. Or someone steals something for you that's worth $50 and someone else gives you $50. Or if it's going to cost you $300 now to buy that same item, you get $300. That's being restored and made whole and being put in a position that you would be in had that item not been taken from you. So I reject the narrative that giving something back that was stolen equals taking something from someone else. And I also reject the language that frames compensation for what is owed to someone as a gift or a grant.
And just to make sure I'm tracking you. So you would say like restitution is an available option when the thing that was taken can be restored, when the thing that was taken would exist and also can be restored, or a compensation could be paid for that. And that's not the same as reparations, right? Because if we're looking at slavery, for example, it's impossible to kind of give back what was taken through that process. Is that the distinction you're making, or is there something else?
Can I just jump in for a minute here? I think that when we think about reparations, we think about it as it is defined by the folks working in the reparations movement. But when you think about reparations, you think about repair, right? And repair is giving back what was stolen. That's a form of repair, right? And so in this case, we're asking that land be restored back to its rightful owners. And if not, then restitution in the form of monetary compensation be paid to those folks to make them whole again, right? And so I think it's a tricky thing to define, because we're still trying to figure out within the movement, the reparations movement, what exactly is reparations? Is it just for descendants of enslaved folks, or is it all for all Black folks? Like, so there's so many definitions out there. But what we do is we don't argue or talk about or debate about what reparations mean. We know that restoring land and paying restitution is a form of repair, and that's how we operate.
That is awesome. And I thank you for jumping in there, because my next question is for you, and it is about your mission. So tell us more about why you founded Where Is My Land, and tell us about your mission a little bit.
Sure, absolutely. So I founded Where's My Land to address the influx of emails I received from Black people across this nation, with the hopes that we could aid them in their efforts to reclaim their land. You know, they heard about what happened to the Bruces. They learned that this was the first time that land had been returned to Black people, right, in this country, and they became hopeful again. Many of our claimants have been fighting to get their land back for decades, right? And so this happening for them is like, great, it's hope, right? It's inspiration, and I'm here for it, right? And so right now we have approximately 400 families asking for our help. Many of those families have been met with barriers such as statute of limitations and fraud by white supremacist judges, and the very courts they leaned on to provide justice. And despite having ample proof of the land being theirs, like a lot of our families have actual deeds that have been passed down in Bibles from generation to generation. They have all sorts of evidence of this theft, and still the courts deny them justice time and time again. And many of them have, exhausted all of their appeals. So for me, I feel like I decided to do this work nationally because I felt like there's some policies that need to be changed, right? I think that specifically as it relates to legal things, I think that needs to be just revamped and maybe even abolished, because the system is not set up to protect Black people in general, right? And so when we go to the courts asking for justice, the same justice that will be awarded to white people, and we don't get it despite having the proof, even though those white people may not even have the proof, the system is flawed, and we have to work to change it in every state across this country. And so that is what inspired me to keep going. The families who have been harmed and have not had redress.
And it sounds like there's a component to advocacy in your work then, especially if you're talking about laws and you're talking about courts. So tell us a little bit more about how advocacy, research, and technology play into your work.
I mean, the gist of it is that we help claimants devise and implement advocacy strategies based on documentation we find via research, or they find via research while using technology, right? But ultimately, we're very new in this. We just started our business less than a year ago as it relates to Where's My Land. And so there are certain phases of the way in which we plan to implement our strategy. And so one of our plans is to develop an app that aids folks that can't really afford to get the help that they need, and that we can't really help because we're limited in our capacity to do it. So this app is essentially going to help them in their research efforts so they can try to get redress on their own.
Awesome. Kamala, could you talk more about some of the families that are in your database?
Oh boy, this is where I have an issue. There are so many that I love so much. And so I'm trying to narrow it down to West Coast, East Coast, South. So I'm going to try to hit 3. I'll try to be as concise as possible, but it is difficult because I love talking about my families. The first one I wanted to highlight is in a family, it's a group of families and descendants from Russell City, California. Now, Russell City was home to about 1,400 residents, famous for West Coast blues scene. It had about 400 homes. It had its own school, 7 churches, and it was the only place Black and Latino people were allowed to live because redlining and racially restrictive covenants and steering practices forbid them from purchasing or even renting land in Alameda County or in the city of Hayward in California. Banks refused to approve loans for Black people who were interested in purchasing property in any white neighborhoods. And so they steered them to Russell City where they could get a loan for their homes. Now, the city was unincorporated. They did not have a fire department, no sewage system. It wasn't connected to a water supply, and residents relied on wells and disposed of sewage in septic tanks. And they got electricity by hooking up car batteries to power cables. And even though the city and county were aware of the conditions, they refused to help implement any city services. And all they did was really complain about it. And after a while, it was about 1956, the efforts to condemn the city started. And they created a grand jury that issued a report. And every year for 5 years thereafter, declaring the city a blight, and that's a buzzword, and saying that it was a highly explosive health menace. And this is despite the fact that there was no evidence of any diseases in the city, but they actually took credit for that and said, well, we go in there so much and do so much work with the residents that they don't get sick, and that's why they're not sick. But then said it was a health hazard, and said that it had bad social problems in all phases. And they held hearings in the 60s, and they allowed residents to come to the hearings. However, the city was eventually condemned in 1963, and the forced relocation started. And the very last resident to leave the city was named Ernesto Villa, and he was the son of the Mexican revolutionary Pancho Villa. He said at 2 hours after he left his home, he watched it be burned to the ground. Now, because most of these houses were razed, they were bulldozed, they were burned, there was no compensation for it. There was no evidence that they'd ever owned a house. Oh, and before that, by the way, there was like mysterious burnings that would take place. And since the fire department was located in another city, by the time they got to Russell City, the house was gone. And as a matter of fact, there was one point where 4 children died in a house fire because the fire department took so long. The residents have come to us and want to be fairly compensated for where they would be had that city been allowed to thrive and had it been annexed to Hayward County. When it was destroyed, every street sign was taken down and it was turned into an industrial park, which it still is now. My next family that I want to talk about is in California. Oh, go ahead. You want your question? Yay.
No, I think I feel like you're so steeped in the work and so well versed in the work that a lot of the things you're talking about may be new to people who are on the
okay.
So I just want to take a moment and pause and sort of honor like everything that you just put into that one description of that one family that you're working with. And so I don't think a lot of people know what segregation in the United States looked like on a daily basis. So what I wanted to call out was that we're talking about basic services that we take for granted today, right?
Yes.
Sewer systems, fire services, electricity, right? Were not provided in these communities, right? I also want to call out a couple of things. So much in there. Like you talked a little bit about redlining, but we didn't really sort of describe what that was. And also the way that you went through the series of events, let's make sure that we understand that it's not just one group of people targeting these communities, right? It's a variety of different groups targeting violence towards these communities. So can you talk a little bit about what redlining is and why Black people couldn't get loans for houses in certain neighborhoods, Black and Latino people?
Really a conspiracy to keep them out of the white neighborhoods. If a Black family came and they wanted to live on a street where that was a predominantly white neighborhood, they just would not qualify for the loan, or it would be at such interest rates that they couldn't afford it. And there was also racially restrictive covenants, and that is a neighborhood association gets together and it's written into the lease. You cannot sell this home to a Black person, a Latino person, or an Asian person. And that covenant carries through the lease. And so they could not sell to Black people, even if they had wanted to, some people, even if they wanted to sell the house to a person of color, it was forbidden. So, and redlining and steering is basically you have a real estate agent, and rather than showing you a home in a neighborhood that you asked for that might be a white neighborhood, they take you to the Black neighborhood and show you only those homes and say, this is the home that you can afford, and this is the home that I recommend for you. And you don't even get to look at the homes in the white neighborhoods.
Awesome. Thank you for providing that clarity. I'm ready for the next family now.
Okay, my next family is a family from Connecticut. Now, this is all the way across. You think sometimes the East Coast is going to be different. The racism is not going to be as bad, and that is absolutely not true. So imagine being the only Black landowner in a town where you were also a founder of the town, only to have the land that you bought from the town subsequently taken back and you not be paid for it. That is what happened to our family. The ancestor had come from Virginia. I think it was 1899. She'd lost a son in a rail car accident and got a settlement for $30,000. She used that money to purchase land, 30 acres, but she eventually owned a lot more than that. She was one of the largest landowners in the town, the only Black woman landowner, because she had also lost her husband when she was relatively young. But she didn't hold the title of only Black female landowner, because subsequently she sold off property to her daughters along with her sons. So the family lived all in one area. It was like a neighborhood, and they were living in properties that were adjacent to each other. This woman was the first person to get in line when it was time for the town to become incorporated. The town refused to let her in because they did not want a Black woman to be the first one on the roster. So they made her wait until 3 or 4 white families came and signed their names on the town charter, and then they let her in. Now, this family, they were self-sufficient, and as I said, extended family living around each other. They raised animals. They had their own water from a drinking well. However, they were the victims of constant and relentless racism. The family tells me that they remember the KKK riding by their house after they would have a meeting, drunk and terrorizing them. One family member remembers a KKK member approaching her and another relative on a bridge in fully hooded costume and recognized the person as someone in the police force. And the KKK also used to force their grandmother to cook for the meetings, the KKK meetings. And then they would return later and give her family the leftovers. They never ate that. When the landowner died was when the problem started, and when the town started coming in and just kind of exercising eminent domain over various parcels and threatening her if she didn't sell to the town. They said they needed it for a park, they needed it for a building, just whatever, a road, and she didn't want to. And at one point, one of the relatives actually signed under duress because the attorney advised her that if she went on and gave them this land, they wouldn't come back, but that was wrong. And the last straw was when the town needed a dump. And the dump ended up a few feet from their house. Even though newspaper articles clearly show that they had identified a place that was appropriate for a dump, they called it an eyesore, but it was owned by a white family, and they did not put it there. They ended up putting it on her family's property. And somehow the family does not own very much of that land at all. The dump contaminated the family water. And exactly how the town acquired that dump is kind of vague. Nobody's been successful in finding a transfer or any condemnation orders. So the family fully believes that this whole thing and putting the dump, because they grew up smelling trash as children, and they said it was just really, really bad in the summertime. And all of this was done in an attempt to motivate them to move. And then when they didn't move, they just started exercising eminent domain for the parks and other businesses that now occupy the land, including Amazon, I think, is on that property.
Oh, one second. We have a couple of people who are in the audience who want to know the name of the town in Connecticut that is being discussed.
I don't feel comfortable saying that right now. I don't feel comfortable saying the town yet. It'll be known soon. But
yeah, we've had some challenges with them being threatened recently. So
yes, very recently.
Don't want to divulge that information right now.
Thank you for giving us that piece of information. The saga continues. Kamala, I do want you to feel free to continue telling this story about Connecticut, or if you wanted to move on to your next family.
I'll move on. I'm trying not to talk too much. I do enjoy talking about my people. They're always so delightful to talk to, and they're so excited to have someone listening to them and to have someone who's trying to help them. So I get excited because they're excited. The last one I'll talk about for now is in Arkansas. And this gentleman was a caretaker for an older gentleman for years and years and years. The older gentleman had a stroke and moved in with this claimant and lived with him for the rest of his life. And when he died, although our claimant was just doing this out of the goodness of his heart, when the man died, he found out that he had left him a significant portion of land in the will. And he'd also named him the executor of the will. So the claimant went, he filed the will for probate. He published notice of administration of the estate in the appropriate venue. He asked that anyone, any entity with a claim against the estate come forward to present the claim to the court, which is a legal thing to do, and no one came forward. So when he filed his action to quiet the title to the land, it was granted. He was discharged as personal representative of the estate, and the court issued an order that said, and I quote, that no further claims against this estate are allowed at the time, because as the time to present them has expired. So then our claimant goes to the land or sends a surveyor to the land to survey it. And he's met by an employee of a timber company that had set up shop there and had been chopping down trees and issuing hunting licenses to townspeople. And when the surveyor arrived, he was threatened, told not to return, or he would be arrested. And our claimant was also threatened with arrest as well. So he had to file another action to quiet title specifically against this company. And the timber company, they challenged it, and they went to court. That now, mind you, the timber company had so many arguments as to why they thought they owned the land. They went from one argument to another. The first argument was that they had gotten it from one deed. That deed was not valid. And then they came and said they got it from another deed. However, that deed, the person who gave it to them, there was no evidence that they ever owned the land at all. Not to mention that it had never paid taxes on this property. So then it claimed that it owned the property due to adverse possession. Now, adverse possession is an open and notorious occupation of land that you rope off and you show you own. And it's done, it's just out in the open, but that requires also paying taxes. And the timber company could not produce evidence of any of that. While our claimant had an accurate legal description of the land and his deed, which is also required for a deed. If you have a deed and a person who does not know where that land is cannot use that deed to subsequently go and find that property, the deed is not valid. And the timber company's deed did not have an accurate description, whereas our claimants did have an accurate description. So that argument wasn't going to work anyway either. So then the timber company said that the claimant's deed was invalid because the river had changed and now it was located in a different county, and convinced the judge to rule on that. And so the timber company was ordered to survey this land. They have yet to produce a survey, so we don't know where it's really located. The court did not require a survey to go out and look and see and map it out to see if it had actually switched over in the last 100 years to the other county. And so the timber company won the property. And this timber company is so notorious for acquiring land by adverse possession that one of their cases is used as an example of adverse possession in law school. I found 3 cases where they've done the same thing to private landowners, and they're notorious for setting up where there's just happens to be a lot of timber right next door, and they'll erect their fence just a little bit over here and start sneaking and chopping down trees and then end up actually walking away with somebody's property. So those are the 3 I'll highlight for now.
Wow.
Yeah.
So you've done a lot of specific instances of specific stories about families and their struggles. Can you talk more broadly about the relationship of Black people in general to the land in America and how that might be different from other racial or ethnic groups?
Well, Maisie, it shouldn't be different, but unfortunately it is, because Black people in general aren't used to necessarily having land or being able to keep it without being constantly vigilant. And unlike other groups, Black people as a collective were never allowed to get into a rhythm of having a relationship with land ownership. And at least not a relationship that was very long lasting and that was not always threatened. And We have claimants whose ancestors actually received 40 acres and a mule, documented. I've seen the deed. And it was later taken away by the same government that gave it to them. And it seems that, to me, what I found is that even when Black people have willingly acquiesced to segregation laws that restricted them from living in areas, when we have voluntarily avoided white communities that express that they don't want us there, set up separate towns and start to mind our business, established our business, and become self-sufficient. Once the land where the Black people live on becomes desirable to developers, or God forbid, the Black people on that land are perceived to be better off than the poorest white person in a nearby vicinity, that land becomes a target, and it's threatened and it's vulnerable to being lost. And as a result, entire towns have been razed, populations have been murdered and buried in mass and unmarked graves. And then history forgets the atrocities, so that generations of Black people grow up having no knowledge that land ownership with Black people used to be a thing, and that there were entire self-sufficient communities of Black towns that were flourishing. And they think that what they see now is what has always been. And so some of our property owning ancestors, likely they were afraid to even recreate the towns that were lost, just for fear that it was going to happen again. What's the point? It's going to just be taken away. And so there's sort of a PTSD there. And I have families, and like you mentioned too, families that say their elders couldn't even discuss their land being stolen because of the trauma it caused them just to talk about it. And only after that relative died did the family find documentation and deeds that show that the relative had owned property and understood what their relative had been holding on to for all of their lives. And, you know, as a community, if you've never witnessed or experienced land ownership in your family and your community in general, it's not something you automatically grow up assuming will be your reality. Right. You know, so I take, for example, rural land. In 2016, there was a USDA report, and it revealed that the 5 largest white landowners in America own more land than the entirety of the Black community in America combined. So that is 5 people with more land than 40 million Black people. And Black people, making up about 13% of the population at that time in 2016, were less than 1% of rural landowners. And I will name names right now. Ted Turner owns 2 million acres of land, and that is 3 times the land that makes up the state of Rhode Island. And as for home ownership in general, Black Americans own homes at a rate lower than any other group, 43.4%. White people own their homes at 72.1%. Asians, even 61.7% in their community. And now, most recently, Hispanic Americans have bypassed Black people and own their homes at a rate of 51%. So every other large ethnic group is more likely to witness home ownership growing up than Black people. So if no one in your family's ever owned a home, you don't have any experience with inheritance, you have no lessons in accumulating property to be passed down. So yeah, and sad, a lot of our families are finding out that they should be property owners already.
Again, your awesomeness knows no bounds. I do want to just make sure I picked up something in your discussion. I picked up a lot of things in your discussion, but I do want to take a moment to pause on this idea of 40 acres and a mule to make sure that our audience knows what that is a reference to, why it would be unexpected that that promise was delivered on, and why it would be surprising that that promise was revoked.
When slaves were freed, there was legislation passed on Reconstruction that each slave, each family would be given 40 acres of land and a mule to start off with, so that they could become self-sufficient, have some property and own some property. And I believe there was a little bit of execution of that, but it was not long lasting. And I've seen a lot of, I don't know how many families total lost that in the United States, but I do know that all of our families that have 40 acre and a mule deeds, and like President Grant signed the deed of one of the families that I saw, and they somehow just lost the land, and they can't really figure out why. There's a lot of fraud there. People who could read and write would forge signatures and transfer the land to them. Some of them, I think, were run off by mobs and other various nefarious means.
Thank you. Kavan, can you tell us a little bit more of how you would like your work to unfold in the next 10 years?
Yeah, I just wanna before I answer that question, just say thank you, Kamala. You are amazing.
Yes, ma'am.
And she knows that it's difficult for me to talk about these things because I get so heated. So thank you for doing that, Kamala. So in the next 10 years, I like to be fully operational, and that we'll have regional advocacy and policy consultants across the nation actively pursuing statewide policy change as it relates to ensuring reparative justice in the form of land returned and or restitution paid to Black victims of land theft. We'd also like to have our app and tech tools fully operational so that we can help more families and have more reach.
So we do have a, thank you for that. We do have a couple of questions in the chat. And one that I thought was particularly interesting is from Sophie. And Sophie says that I know that Black communities, especially during the late 1800s, early 1900s, often pooled their resources, making themselves a target of both terrorists and the government. Do you see a connection between the racism your families are experiencing and this anti-communal lifestyle sentiment? And either one of you guys can feel free to answer that question.
I mean, I feel like any opportunity for Black people to come together and be in community and own and to keep the money circulating within the community and the property circulating generation to generation, there's always going to be some resistance to that. It just is. And so I think that oftentimes when we come together and talk about building community, building, businesses, it's so that we can be in community, right? And so that we don't have to rely on a people that don't want us to even exist. And Kamala touched on this before, even still, even when we do our own thing and we build and we develop and we lift each other up, it's burnt down. Like in Tulsa, it's bombed, we're beaten, we're run off. It's like there's no space for us to do anything. And I think that it's because, this anti-community that I think this country represents is, I think, a result of them being afraid that we'll band together and fight harder for justice. But I think it's something that we have to resist that resistance, right? We have to still be in community because we're all we have. And we're witnesses of this today. Today, we're still hated. There's still, like, you had a gunman show up in a grocery store and murder 10 Black people, right? And said, this is your reparations. So it's a constant battle. It's a constant fight. And unfortunately, the only way we can battle this is if we're in community. And I think this country has done an amazing job of making sure that they can divide and conquer.
I have a couple of more questions in the chat that I do want to bring up as well. Thank you so much for that, Kavan. I'm not sure if you want to tackle this one or if we want, hold on, I got a technical error. Hold on one second. Or, what's happening is actually not a technical error on my part. It's actually people are blowing up the Q&A. Thank you guys for that. I can't keep up. So we had one question about, and this aligns with what you're saying, do you have an estimate for how many Black families had land that has been taken from them? This one specifies illegal or unjustly. But I
don't know across the country how many, but we've got upwards of 400 people who have come to us in just a couple of months. So that is just the people who know about us. Mm-hmm. So I mean, it's got to be a lot more because a lot more people don't even know that we exist. So
yeah, definitely. Hopefully you'll have the happy problem tonight of seeing a spike in the amount of people who are interested in your services. There's another question that's more tactical around the Black farmers class action lawsuit against the USDA. Has that had any significant impact on reversing Black owned land loss over the years?
I have to say, we have not done a lot with that because they are in litigation and they are represented. So I honestly am not going to even pretend that I know a whole lot about that. We're doing mostly individual families and not like a lot of group class action type things, because that's not our
Yeah. And then I'd
industry.
like to also add that, you know, most of our families have tried this in the court, right? They've tried to fight this in the court, but were unsuccessful, right? And so I think that the only hope they have is to try this in a court of public opinion.
Mm.
And I think that is what brings most of our people to us. The fact that they tried litigating it. And at this point, they just need policy change, and they need for there to be some type of campaign that makes people aware of this, so that folks will be forced to change, hopefully, right?
And there's also like a tactical element too, right? One of the questions in the Q&A is that person understands that more than 90% of the property cost estimators are white. And so that person wanted to know if there's anything being done somewhere to certify other people to do this type of work, or how sort of that process could be enhanced or improved or diversified.
I don't know much about that, so I can't comment on it.
Okay, good answer. All right, and this might be something you'd be interested in responding to. This person wanted to know how often the taken land from Black people overlaps with the stolen land and broken treaties with Native American people.
It overlaps in that a lot of some of our families are indigenous as well.
Mhm.
They are members of tribes, and we work very hard and very careful to work with them and not step on toes. However, I do not, discuss tribal land because they're subject to different laws that we don't get into. So if the Black family is also indigenous, yes, there is an overlap, because some have received land from treaties and it's taken, but it's kind of difficult and kind of a gray area as to whether or not our organization is the most appropriate to assist them with that return of that property.
Yeah, and I'd also like to add that, you know, just as other groups center themselves, we are centering Black people, because Black people are never thought of. And clearly, if we were thought of in this space, then we wouldn't need to be doing what we're doing now. So we let other folks handle their business and we handle ours.
Adrian wants to know how we can find out if this has happened in their own communities.
It is, if you don't know whether or not it's happened, it's kind of a little difficult to get started, but you might want to look at what your neighborhood looked like in the early 19th century, early 18th century, not 18th century, 1800s, 1900, who lived there at the time, and whether or not the neighborhood was predominantly Black. And also look at your state highway. That's one of the biggest culprits of dislocating people that I've seen by eminent domain, is building a highway straight through a Black neighborhood and splitting it along the side of the road. And then you have this road with traffic and noise, and it's not, a good and safe place to live because it's loud. And so I would look at the state highways and just research addresses of where your family was, and see if anybody in your family, ancestry.com, has some of this, and see where they live. You can find sometimes in the census where people live, and it'll tell you if the person is the homeowner or a tenant. It's pretty clear. They'll say, homeowner or owner, and then it'll say somebody else is a tenant, and you can kind of tell, and then you can start from there. But most of our families have heard from just word of mouth, just oral history. They found out that their family were landowners.
Yeah, and I also like to add that, folks should be careful, because a lot of the information out there is not always accurate, right? A lot of the information the government allows for you to see is not always accurate. They have a lot of fraudulent documents. They were nefarious, right? And so I would argue that oral history weighs more than anything that any government entity provides, because I don't trust them given the harm that they've caused and the fact that they've tried to cover up so much accurate information as it relates to Black people owning land.
And piggybacking once again on that, my family in Connecticut actually had started researching their land, and back in the 80s, they were able to find deeds and transfer, evidence of transfer, and the documents have disappeared from the deeds hall. Pages torn out, non-existent.
Yep. A lot of erasure.
Wow. Well, you guys are fascinating and passionate and lovely. And I would love to know what it would look like for you guys to be so successful that you brought all this passion to the game and you worked yourselves out of jobs. What would that look like for each of you?
I mean, for me, it would be like national policy passed and fully implemented without discrimination or resistance to return stolen land to Black people and or pay restitution to the ones in the form that really can't get the land back, pay them money, fair market value for what their property would be worth. Also, money paid to folks for violation of their civil and human rights and their loss of business enterprise. I just think that I read one person say that you can't repair slavery, and you can't, right? There's so much damage that's been done that you can never fully repair, but you can do something. You can pay something to help folks get back something, right? Like everything is taken from Black people. Our lives are taken, our property is taken, our opportunity to pass down generational wealth is taken. Everything we earn, we have taken from us. And so we are tired, and we're tired, not just emotionally and physically, we are just tired mentally. And at some point, there needs to be some sort of repair. It will never fully repair everything that we've gone through. But we also need to understand that this is not just a problem of the past. This is a problem of the present, and it will continue to be a problem in the future. Right? So how do you pay for all of that? Because I don't foresee it stopping anytime soon. And I know that may sound a little pessimistic, but look at how long we've been fighting. It's like we're giving birth to generations of children, and we have to prepare them to keep the fight going. Enough is enough. And so I want to see those good white people stand up and do the right thing and encourage and persuade and force their families to do the right thing. Because I know that there are anti-Black folks, there are white supremacists in every family. So don't say that you're a good white person or not all white people are bad if you're not going to try to create the change that this country needs to see, that Black people need to see. We are tired, we're exhausted, and we're forced to do the work and to solve the problems that you all created. We are tired.
For me, I think success would look like we have so many wins, so much land being returned to people, so many people receiving restitution and being restored, that it becomes expected and not the exception. Mm-hmm. And not that you're, Bruce's Beach. I would love a time where there's so many names to say that Bruce's Beach is one of hundreds or thousands.
We say the names of the people stolen from us by police. We say their names. There are millions of them. So I want to be able to say the names of the people who are able to get property given back to them. The same number, even more.
Yes.
I'm tired of saying the names of people who are taken from us. I want to start saying the names of land that's given back to us.
Wow. Well, that was a mic drop moment. I am going to use it though, pick up the mic and say to you, Kavan, and also to you, Kamala, we are tired, but I think also, and this cannot go unnoticed, we are also resilient. And I think that is important to note, because I think what you are doing here in your work is the sort of embodiment of the resilience, right? Even though we're tired, we still have a vision for a better future. Even though we've struggled, we have a vision for a world that is better than the one that we've inherited. And look at you doing the thing, right? Look at you out here putting in the work, not being defeated, not giving up. and actually, working across the entire nation to bring and restore land back to Black people. And to me, I know you're tired and it's the end of the day, but I don't want that to be like the last thing people take away from what you guys are saying, what you ladies, what you women, what you powerful women are saying tonight. I want to thank you for your resiliency, for your intellect, for your love, for your passion and this work. And I want to support you any way I can. And I'm sure the people in this audience want the opportunity to support your efforts. So how can they do that?
Yeah, I mean, I'm happy to talk about how you guys can help, but I just want to also say, as it relates to resilience, I'm tired of having to be resilient. I want to choose to be resilient, right? Why do we have to be resilient?
I got you.
No,
I do.
outside of that, if you guys want to help and you want to support, we are always looking for volunteers. We're always looking for donations. Please donate through our website, www.whereismyland.org. We are also looking to partner with law firms across the nation to get these families some help on a contingency or pro bono basis. So if you know folks who are willing to donate their services, please reach out to us at landback@whereismyland.org. We're also on social media, Where Is My Land, all platforms. Kamala, if there's anything, do you want to add anything?
Help that I could use, you said researchers, we could use title researchers as well. And even just people to help us interview families and collect documents and help us with writing summaries that would be presented to attorneys as well.
Awesome. We're going to open it up for a few more questions, or if there are any other questions. We're just getting a lot of shout outs here in the chat. I'm looking for questions. I get some thank yous. I've got some comments, but mostly about how amazing you guys are and how passionate and how lovely. I got to preach. I got to put lots of exclamation points over here. So thank you guys. I don't see any other questions in the chat.
I do have one other comment I want to make. I want us to really think about when we ask you to donate, it's not just for operational purposes, right? It is also for security purposes. What people don't understand is that this work is extremely dangerous. You know, in my fight to get the land back for the Bruces, that was dangerous for me. I was the only person, and I need to make sure that my team is good. I need to make sure that these families are safe. So, and I also need to make sure that our information is safe, right? Because, you know, information technology, we're under attack online as well, right? So also think about, you know, if you're helping, ways in which you can help with those issues that we have. If you know a security firm who's willing to provide security services, we are open to accepting that. If you know someone who is willing to make sure that we are protected on all fronts technology-wise, we are open to that. Anything that you all can do to help would be very amazing. And that's it.
We've got a question from Geraldine while you guys are still here. I just saw this pop up in the Q&A about their family's land in South Carolina that was passed down over generations. Recently, they received a letter from a real estate investor in Florida. What's the best way to discourage them from taking what they may think is a good opportunity? I guess that's to encourage their family from selling the property. Yeah, eventually through tax increases or eminent domain as well. So how can we discourage this from happening?
I think, honestly, in my experience, I think organizing, right, within your community, amongst your family, and getting the word out, letting the public, as many people as possible, know about what is going on, calling them out online, right? Like not letting up. I think oftentimes this stuff has to be fought in the court of public opinion. I think we need to remember that, because I don't think that the system, the justice system, is going to protect us. We have to guilt a lot of people into doing the right thing, unfortunately.
Geraldine wants to note that her grandmother lived to 119.
Wow. I wish. I wish. That's amazing.
Any last thoughts from either of you ladies?
I would just say, Geraldine, if would you mind submitting this information through our website, submitting this claim through our website? I'd like to learn a little bit more about this. And again, that site is www.whereismyland.org.
Awesome. And I am going to turn it back over to Paul. Paul, are you ready to close this out?
Wow. Kavan, Kamala, and Maisie, thank you for this important conversation. I know that I'd like to acknowledge the passion, your commitment, and how difficult it is to share your story with us. And so on behalf of the National Building Museum, I truly am so honored that you've spent some time with us to bring this to our attention. To our audience, I'd also like to thank you for your thoughtful questions and comments. We'd like to know what you thought about this program, and we encourage you to complete a short survey that you'll receive following the end. And finally, this program was recorded and an edited version will be available on our website, mbm.org, within 10 business days. Thank you all so much for joining us.